You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got another screw up by Donald Trump's attorney, Alina Habba. So, she tried to wage this last ditch attack against E Jean Carroll's attorney, and it backfired on her. So, first off, can you explain Alina Habba's allegations of impropriety against E Jean Carroll's attorney, Roberta Kaplan, and what Roberta Kaplan did in response?
Yeah, pretty dramatic allegation by Donald Trump's lawyer, Elena Habba. She sent a letter to Judge Kaplan, the judge who presided over the E. Jean Carroll trial that Trump just lost in spectacular fashion to the tune of $83.3 million. And in that letter, she accused the judge, Judge Kaplan, of having a mentor mentee relationship with one of E. Jean Carroll's lawyers, Roberta Kaplan, no relation, when the two overlapped briefly in a law firm some years ago. Now, if true, that would be an important thing to know because it could give rise to a potential conflict of interest if a judge has an unduly close relationship or had a close relationship with one of the lawyers in the case. Here's the problem. Elena Habba got that from some anonymous source that was mentioned in a New York Post article. And the source indicated that, well, yeah, I think 30 years ago, when Judge Kaplan, Lewis Kaplan, and Roberta Kaplan briefly overlapped at the same law firm, I think they had a mentor mentee relationship. The problem is, after that letter was filed by Alina Habba, and she was saying, this is outrageous. I can't believe the judge or the lawyer didn't disclose this. This shows the continued pattern of bias against Donald Trump and his lawyers, and we're going to use this as part of our appeal in this case. Here's the problem. Roberta Kaplan, the lawyer, immediately filed a letter in reply saying, let's look at the facts. 30 years ago, then Lewis Kaplan, now Judge Kaplan, and I briefly overlapped at the same law firm, an enormous law firm. And by the way, I never worked with Lewis Kaplan. We never had a client in common. We never even met, as best I can remember. Kind of the opposite of a mentor mentee relationship.
Yeah.
Those are the facts. And so all of a sudden, this pretty, dramatic allegation by Elena Habba just sort of poof, evaporated.
Now, why do you think Alina Habba backed off? Like, what could have happened if this did go back to the courtroom?
She backed off because I think she accepted opposing counsel Roberta Kaplan's pretty definitive assertion, if you read the letter, that she doesn't even have a recollection of meeting or interacting in any way with Lewis Kaplan, now Judge Kaplan, 30 years ago when they briefly overlapped at the same enormous law firm. So I think what may have been weighing on Elena Habba's mind was something that Roberta Kaplan put in her letter saying, by the way, we reserve our right to call for Rule 11 sanctions against Elena Habba for making this, quote, false allegation. And if we look at Elena Habba's history, Rule 11 has not been kind to her. She represented Donald Trump in a completely baseless, frivolous, politically motivated lawsuit that he brought against Hillary Clinton and Department of Justice officials for trying, being involved in a conspiracy to try to get me. And Brian, let me just read the first couple of sentences from a federal court judge in Florida regarding what he did with that bad faith lawsuit that Elena Habba filed on behalf of Donald Trump. Quote, this case should never have been brought. Its inadequacy as a legal claim was evident from the start. No reasonable lawyer would have filed it. Intended for a political purpose, none of the counts of the amended complaint stated a cognizable legal claim. 31 individuals and entities were needlessly harmed in order to dishonestly advance a political narrative. A continuing pattern of misuse of the courts by Mr. Trump and his lawyers undermines the rule of law, portrays judges as partisans and diverts resources from those who have suffered actual legal harm. And the judge ordered sanctions against Elena Habba of
Yeah.
nearly $1 million, $938,000. That might have been in the back of Elena Habba's mind when she ultimately withdrew her allegation of a mentor-mentee relationship between the judge and opposing counsel and said, my bad, this matter seems to have come to a conclusion.
It's almost impressive the way that they can turn, these tiny sums or no money being owed at all of a sudden into tens of millions of dollars that they have to pay between the two of them, between Donald Trump and Alina Habba herself. I think they turned what would have been nothing into a $5 million judgment that turned into an $83 million judgment. Now we could be looking at, if had Alina Habba continued to plow forward with these allegations, God knows how many sanctions against her, in addition to the nearly $1 million that she's already contending with. So pretty impressive there by these two.
And Brian, let me just add this. What has she succeeded in doing, though? She has put in writing in a letter to the judge, you had an improper
Right.
mentor-mentee relationship with E. Jean Carroll's lawyers. Do you think Donald Trump's supporters will just turn a blind eye to that
Right.
now that it's been debunked? Or is that now going to become yet another false conspiracy narrative that we hear forever moving forward?
And that's the thing. As long as they can say it and introduce it into the narrative, she can pull back and not pursue this any further. But to your exact point, now they've gotten this bug in their ear, and that's what they're going to run away with. And so the damage has kind of already been done, because from the beginning, this whole thing was just a PR operation anyway. Donald Trump always viewed any of his court proceedings as basically a campaign event, and so this is just part of that, and it's just another effort to another way that he can discredit the judge in this case as part of the deep state, and that's out to get him with the Democrats. And so this is all just some convenient narrative, and the lies aren't a bug in any of this. It's a feature. This is all very much the point of all of this for the Trump campaign.
Yeah. And when you hear the kind of language that federal judge used, my 30 years as a prosecutor, I never heard a judge use anything that approached that. And yet this federal judge in Florida called out Donald Trump and his lawyers for an intentional misuse and abuse of the legal system. And that really is what Donald Trump has been about from day one,
Right.
to this very day.
Yeah, and I think the point that was made in that kind of scathing retort was an important one, and that is that taking the resources away from people who actually need the judicial system is why it's so abusive. I mean, this is all, like I just said earlier, this is all part of his campaign. I mean, this is all just useless. It wastes people's time. It wastes people's money. It wastes people's energy. It wastes these finite resources that could go to people who actually do need to avail themselves of the justice system. And instead they can't, because, this guy who's starved for attention can't help himself but to go to court and just kind of, yell at the judge for a few minutes so that he can send out a fundraising email to help himself in the next election. Glenn, I do want to ask this question because I think it's worth asking. How unusual is it that people who worked in the same law firm at some point in their careers end up in different aspects of the judicial space?
Not that unusual. There's so much cross-pollination in the legal profession, where people are circling through government agencies, and then they leave government service, they go to a law firm, they come back to a government agency, and there really are lots of opportunities to kind of encounter and then re-encounter lawyers who, practice in a certain space. Sometimes law firms will have specialties, but here's the thing. Some of these law firms employ thousands and thousands of lawyers. They have offices literally all around the world.
Right.
And it seems like, the fact that Roberta Kaplan and Lewis, now Judge Kaplan, worked at the same firm, sizable firm, 30 years ago. I think there was less than a 2-year overlap. It's not surprising that they never even met. So, this is not at all unusual for folks in the legal profession over the years to sort of come and go into each other's professional lives in all sorts of
Well,
ways.
to that point, what does it say about Alina Habba that she used an unnamed source as the basis for this complaint. Notwithstanding the fact that, the whole point, that she knew it was probably bullshit to begin with, but she just needed some excuse to introduce this into the right-wing media ecosystem. But what does it say about her lawyering that this is the avenue she took?
It says, one, she is a poor lawyer. What should have happened here is if you really thought this anonymous source in the New York Post provided information that was both credible, it was, reliable, and it could be corroborated with actual evidence, not just something some anonymous source spit out, then what you do is you go to opposing counsel. This is about professionalism and civility and ethics. You go to opposing counsel. You say, I'm contemplating filing a letter with the judge because I've seen this news account that you had a mentor-mentee relationship with the judge. Would you care to share information about that before I decide whether to file this letter or not? And Roberta Kaplan probably would have said, I never met the man when we briefly overlapped in an enormous firm 30 years ago. Then any self-respecting, honorable, ethical lawyer would probably have declined to send that letter to Judge Kaplan. But not Elena Habba. She didn't even ask opposing counsel, didn't have the courtesy to ask. Not that she had to blindly accept opposing counsel's answer, but it's just sort of part of the professionalism of our practice. And then she wouldn't have fired off a letter that now may result in her being, sanctioned again to the tune of who knows how much. I think that's unlikely that she's going to be sanctioned because she pretty promptly withdrew the allegation when she said most recently, okay, with that additional information, it seems this issue has been laid to rest. But again, really poor form and really poor lawyering.
Yeah, just when you thought that it couldn't get more humiliating for you after losing your client $83.3 million on top of a $5 million judgment prior to that, she managed to find a way. With that said, we will stay on top of this. If we do have any updates on this case or any of the other prosecutions that Donald Trump and his legal team are contending with right now. With that said, for those watching, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.